We thank you so much for watching Law School Made Easy at Law School Made Easy 256. We want to discuss with you the law of torts, and we want to discuss Navier's shock. We want to appreciate the concept of Navier's shock in semester 1 as you discuss it. Now, this should be one of the shortest videos because I want to summarize it. Now, first, Navier's shock refers to a recognized psychiatric injury that has been caused by witnessing or experiencing a traumatic event caused due to somebody's negligence or intentional acts that you witness. Okay, you get a psychiatric injury, you get harm, psychiatric harm, but it is due to somebody's negligence that you have been able to get that injury. Okay, you have witnessed a traumatic event. Okay, that is the meaning of Navier's shock under the law of torts. Now this under semester 1, it is classified into two. We have primary victims and secondary victims. Now, in the start, in the olden days, at common law in England, the principle was that for you to recover damages under Navier's shock or psychiatric injury, for you to be able to recover, okay, you had it to be a primary victim. A primary victim, they mean that you must have been in that accident. Okay, you must have been in that accident. Then you qualify to be a primary victim. You were in that accident. You were involved. That means that if you went to court and claimed for damages when you were not involved, okay, then you could not recover. That somebody who has suffered shock, psychiatric injury, emotional distress, that somebody who has suffered it should be that somebody who was in that event, that accident, for example. Now, if you were not in that accident, you could not recover. Okay. Let's look at the case of Page versus Smith. Okay. Smith was driving badly when Page was in his car, and then they got an injury, an accident. Of course, Smith did not get like physical injuries, but he later suffered disorders. He had a disorder that later he suffered. Now, court held that Page was to get damages because he was in that accident, he was a primary victim, and therefore he had to recover damages. Smith had a duty of care, towards Page. He should have known that driving recklessly could cause an accident, and therefore damages were awarded. But why are they awarded? They are awarded because he is a primary victim. Now, talking about primary victim, now time came when people were suffering shock, but they could not recover damages. Let's take a case of Alcock. Allow me look for a case of the parties. There is a case of allow me check the parties. Alcock versus New York. The case of Alcock. I just want to get the parties. The facts we know, but let's get the parties well. Alcock. I can't find the case, sorry. Okay, now, yes, the case of Alcock. The case, no, let's begin with the case of, yes, Alcock versus New York. Oh, I can't see Alcock. Okay, it's here. The case of Alcock versus Chief Constable of South Yorkshire. Alcock versus Chief Constable of Southern Yorkshire. Now, there was a football match at Hillsborough. Now, that football match, the field collapsed and the people died. Over 75 people deaths were registered in that case, in that field. Now, Alcock was a bystander who witnessed, okay? Alcock witnessed whatever had happened at a particular time. But, so Alcock sued. The issue at court was whether Alcock could recover for nervous shock, because he was a bystander who actually saw whatever happened. Now, the House of Lords held that Alcock could not recover because he was not involved. Okay? He could not recover because he was not involved. Okay? But in the case of Alcock, the court went ahead and opened the floodgates. Machaz Alcock could not recover because he was not a victim. He was not involved. But there are tests which were formed, which were established, that the test of closeness, that in the future cases, they established that if you suffer, okay, but there are ties of love and affection, the people involved is your sister, is your friend, is your relative, close ties you would cover. Then proximity, that if you were within the area, in the future, they established we would have to consider that one, and then foreseeability. Now, what do we mean here? That Alcock could not recover. But if you see in Victorian Railway, in the case of Victorian Railway versus Caltas, in the case of Victorian Railway versus Caltas, let's have a look at the case of Victorian Railway versus Caltas. Now, in the case of Victorian Railway versus Caltas, Caltas suffered shock, okay, after witnessing a train accident involved, which had the husband and the children involved in there, okay. She suffered nervous shock, okay. Now, in that case, okay, it was also held that Caltas could not recover damages because she was not a primary victim. Okay? Caltas could not recover because she was not. Much as the people involved, there was an husband in there, and remember, the railway was negligent because they were supposed to direct the train very well, and they failed to close the signpost which had that you don't pass here. Now, court held that even Caltas could not recover, but court later established the principles of duty of care, closeness. In these two cases of Alcock and Caltas, court established, widened, it opened the floodgates and created what we call secondary victims. We now have secondary victims, that victims who can recover from events, okay, even when they are not involved. That because my wife was there, because my sister is involved, close ties, okay? So court established secondary victims, that you can suffer a psychiatric injury or impact, the impact rule, but when you are not involved. Let's look at the case of the spelling, Macklin versus O'Brien. McLean versus O'Brien. McLoughlin versus O'Brien. Okay. Now, Mrs. McLean sued O'Brien. The husband and the children were involved in a car accident. Now, she arrived at the scene after 2 hours. Now, the issue was whether O'Brien owed a duty of care to McLean. Now, McLean suffered nervous shock because she arrived and saw that her husband and children were involved in an accident. Now, court held that since she's a secondary victim, the people in there are closely related, love, affection. There is that affection, okay? Now, because of that, court awarded her damages, said she could recover because she was a secondary victim and O'Brien owed a duty of care to Mrs. McLean. Okay, so we are discussing this under 2 ways. One is primary victim and secondary victim. In the primary victim, you are involved. In secondary, there are those elements we have talked about: the proximity, direct perception, love, and foreseeable. Those are some of the elements that you must prove that this person you're connected. I will end with a scenario. If your wife is involved in an accident in Kampala, and then you leave up Arizona here, Seguku, you go to Kampala after 2 hours, and then you see your husband involved, and then you collapse or you suffer a psychiatric injury, okay? Then because is your husband, because it's your wife, whichever person who is in there, then you can recover damages because you are a secondary victim. So a primary, you had to be involved. Now, colleagues, the case of Alcock and the case of Caltas, those 2 cases set the principle, open the floodgate of ensuring that we have secondary victims. We thank you so much for watching Law School Made Easy at Law School Made Easy 26. Subscribe, share, like our video. Thank you. Until next time.